Wednesday, 5 November, 1862. I let Miss Mary wheel me outside today. It was the first time I've been outdoors in weeks. It's turned cold, which I should have expected, but I had thought it would be as warm as the end of September. I was bundled up, though, Miss Mary made sure of that, so I stayed out quite a while. Dr. Warner came outside to have a puff on his pipe, spied me, and came over to talk. He usually doesn't say much to me in the ward, as I'm sure he's intolerably busy. But we had quite a chat out there under the sycamore near the front entrance. We talked about how I missed most of the turning of the leaves, and how nobody likes Mrs. Tanner, and the differences between Alabama and Ohio. He was amazed at my description. He'd never seen our red clay soil. Our talk turned to our families. I told him just a little about Father and Mother, and Will and Caroline. Dr. Warner has a wife and 2 daughters. He did have a son, but he died of pneumonia at a Washington camp before he ever saw any action. Dr. DePriest is his son-in-law, and he has a little girl. I said they must get lonesome being away for so long. Warner just smiled and said he and DePriest are going back in a few weeks to spend a month at home for Christmas. I envy him. Morgan was captured on Sunday afternoon, but Teague and the Home Guard did not hear of it until mid-morning on Monday. With sending for the men guarding the bridges, having to drive out personally to Cantonford Bridge when Matthew Hardy refused to move without an order directly from him, and assigning cleanup crews for the felled trees on some of the outlying roads where men had taken it on themselves to erect barricades, Teague wasn't able to ride back to Oakshade with the Warners until nearly sunset. Dr. Warner had returned to town at around noon, his search fruitless, though he promised his wife he would head back out after he had moved them all home again. The hassles of managing the town's return to normalcy delayed them, so now Warner would have to start out after dark. Teague mounted the familiar stairs with a natural drowsiness he had not felt in some time, and took it as another sign that he was at his best, in his element, when he was being a soldier. He sickened at the thought that for once he would relish lying down on his bed and closing his eyes to a dreamless sleep. Or perhaps not quite dreamless. He had been thinking of Anna Lee between directing his men and fending off people who wanted them to help gather hidden animals and belongings. Provoking her to go made him deserve whatever nightmares his mind could create. The daylight fading in the west shone through the open doors of the bedrooms and striped the floor orange and pink, except in front of Anna Lee's closed door. It created a pocket of darkness at the end of the hall that drew him past his own room with the hope that he could berate himself and all who had been searching for her for missing this most obvious place. He opened the door and stood fixed for the longest time before he could step to the side of her bed, listen to her steady breathing, and make sure this was not one of the hallucinations he'd had once or twice before when he was alone. Everything about the sight was real. Her face, tensed as though reflecting a troubled sleep, her hands, clenched in loose fists, a dress sleeve sticking out from under the mattress and soaked through with blood. At first Teague thought her corsets had come on her, which would explain her taking to bed, but why would the blood get on her sleeves? Then he saw her brogans, stained red-black on the sides an eighth of an inch deep, a state he knew came only from standing in pooled blood. He watched her face again while he thought of the possibilities. Whatever had happened to her, it was bad enough for her to come for solitude at Oakshade without regard for her family's worries and without any intention of telling them about it. He licked his lips and swallowed, and then tucked the sleeve all the way under the mattress. It took a bit more effort to bend down and pull the brogans from beneath the bed, but he managed to pick them up and bury them under the winter blankets stacked in the corner of her closet. When he eased the door shut and turned around, Anna Lee was on her side, watching him with a hollowness in her eyes that Teague was accustomed to seeing when he looked in a mirror, but not when he looked at her. "I'm sorry," she said. Teague stared at her, but she only closed her eyes and settled into a new sleeping position. His breath had been short since he came into the room, and it was some few seconds before he could muster enough to yell downstairs in a cracking voice, his military bellow not forgotten, but simply refused. "She's here!"